Getting a little late in his career to do
That's
that.
right.
I will just respond to the gentleman from Texas and say that we will be submitting questions in writing to you, Mr. Pichai, including the ones from the gentleman from Texas, and we would ask that you answer them promptly.
I'd be very happy to.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Deutsch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pichai, I believe that the platforms can and should do a better job preventing people from using services to engage in illegal activity. Tim Cook recently said platforms and algorithms that promise to improve our lives can actually magnify our worst human tendencies. Some of your peers are publicly reckoning with the ways their companies are not neutral platforms and are accountable for the content on the services. In congressional testimony, Mark Zuckerberg said his company is responsible for the content on its platform. In a Washington Post interview, Uber CEO Dara Khosrowshahi said we have to stand for the content of our platforms. We can't just say we're a platform and our job is done. Mr. Pichai, will you, in front of our committee this morning, join your peers and affirm that Google is accountable for the content on your platforms?
We have a commitment to our users to provide accurate and trustworthy information, high-quality information, and we work hard to uphold those commitments.
I'll take that as a yes. I want to return to the privacy discussion that's gone on. And Mr. Pichai, I went to to do a privacy checkup while we're sitting here, and you're right, it's quite good. But I want to talk about what it does and what it doesn't do, and perhaps you can help me work through this a bit. On my settings now on Google, my location history is paused, my device information is paused, my voice and audio activity are paused, my YouTube watch history is paused, that's probably a good thing, and my YouTube search history is paused. That said, it doesn't mean that you're not collecting data on me, does it?
I think if you, for those categories, if you pause it, we stop collecting.
No, I understand, but overall, it doesn't mean that you've stopped collecting data. You're still collecting data on search. You're still collecting data in ways that can help advertising and help provide the services that you provide. I appreciate that. My question is this. I wanted to focus also on the New York Times article about what they refer to as the mobile location industry. And I understand the way that data is collected when you talk on your website about searching Google, getting directions for maps, watching videos on YouTube. You collect data to make services work better. I understand that. But data is also collected to use in advertising. And according to the New York Times story, it's a hot market. Sales of location-targeted advertising reaching an estimated $21 billion this year. It talks about your company and Facebook dominating the mobile ad market that also lead in location-based advertising. And it says that Google also receives precise location information from apps that use its ad services. Can you explain that to me? Is the New York Times saying that if there is any company that uses your ad services, and given the dominant place that you play in advertising, that would be, I would imagine, most. If there is any company that uses your advertising, then that data that they collect would also be available to you? And ultimately, the data they collect on me is the question I'm asking.
So we, as a company, and we have commitments to you, we view data as belonging to users. We are stewards of it. So we don't transmit personal data to advertisers, if I understand.
No, I understand that. I'm asking about the data that companies, because the New York Times said that Google receives precise location information from apps that use its ad services. My question is, do you receive information, is the New York Times right, do you receive information about the locations that I travel from companies who use your advertising service?
I just want to make sure I understand the specifics, but there may be information. So for example, if we are providing an ad, and let's say it's for a restaurant, we normally would do it in a location near you so that it's relevant for you. You have an option to turn that setting off. But if it is, since we are providing that information, we would be aware of it. It's not coming from that company to us, but
but that's what I want to understand. If a company uses your advertising, does their location sharing get to you? And here's why. Let me just cut, because I don't have a lot of time. The Times talks about the information isn't tied to someone's name or phone number. Your personal information as you define it seems to be name, email address, and billing information. The question a lot of us have, Mr. Pichai, I think you can sense, is that while that may be personal information and you treat that the way we would expect, that there is a lot of information about where we go and where we are at any moment that can, as the Times points out, allow someone with access to the raw data, including employees or clients, to identify a person without their consent by following someone they knew, pinpointing a phone that regularly spent time at that person's home address. Can you use the locations that people go to identify, to back into who a person is? You wouldn't do it, but could someone else do the same thing?
We wouldn't do that without explicit user consent. To answer your question, I'm happy to follow up. I want to make sure I address it. It's a specific question. I think at a high level, I would say location is turning out to be an important area. As we consider privacy legislation, I think it's important we give location protection for our users. As a company, we want to lead the way, and we are taking efforts.
I understand, and I have to go back. Just one last question, Mr. Chairman.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Marino.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for being here, all of you. Let me start out by saying that, sir, you and the office of your company, I think particularly you, because you are at the helm, have a tremendous responsibility towards your employees, responsibility towards your stockholders, to your company, providing jobs, and we thank you for providing jobs. But I think you also have a much more awesome responsibility to the American people, to make sure that you educate accurately, to make sure that you stay in the middle of the road, because I've learned this over the years as a prosecutor and then more so as a member of Congress. There is a lot of people who believe everything that's put out by anyone. We're a 10-second society now, and we can't hold conversations. We can only read 10 or 12 words, and that's supposedly the gospel. You have a responsibility to see that the truth is out there, and I will hold you to doing that. I don't believe in the government taking control or defining, as my friend the judge says, what is right and what is wrong. I, for one, the less federal government in my life, the better. So I am depending on you and companies like your company to help us along the lines, because if the federal government does ever step in to regulate, you're not going to like it. And with that said, I have a concern concerning China. In 2010, Google left the Chinese marketplace due to concerns over hacking attacks, censorship, and how the Chinese government was possibly gaining access to data. I'm interested in what has changed since 2010 and how working with the Chinese government to censor research results are part of Google's core values. Do you understand my question?
Congressman, right now there are no plans for us to launch a search product in China. We are, in general, always looking to see how best. It's part of our core mission and our principles to try hard to provide users with information. We always have evidence based on every country we have operated in. Us reaching out and giving users to more information has a very positive impact, and we feel that calling. But right now there are no plans to launch in China. To the extent that we ever approach a decision like that, I will be fully transparent, including with policymakers here, and engage and consult widely.
Am I then to understand that you have no plans to enter into any agreements with China concerning Google, how it's used in China?
We currently do not have a search product there, and so,
Do you plan on having a search product there?
Right now, there are no plans to launch a search product in China.
Okay, let me ask it this way. If in the future you decide to do that, what information would you share with the Chinese concerning other users, other countries?
Yeah, anytime we look to operate in a country, I mean, we would, we would look at what the conditions are to operate. There are times in the past we have debated the conditions to operate, and we explore a wide range of possibilities. Currently, it is an effort only internally for us. We are not doing this in China, and so, but I'm happy to consult back and be transparent to the extent we plan something there.
I'm sure you are aware that right now there are thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people that the Chinese government has on computers trying to hack in the U.S. and any other countries. Same thing taking place to a lesser degree in Russia, simply because of the population. What can Google do to help curtail that, if not eliminate, countries from hacking into other countries?
As a company, we have faced significant attacks before. So, protecting the security of our users is what really keeps me up at night. And it's something we invest a lot over the years. We work with law enforcement because we rely on their intelligence to help us assess threats. But it's a comprehensive effort, and it's something we take seriously.
Thank you. I yield back. But remember the responsibility that I think you have.
Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Bass, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming today. I wanted to follow up on some questions that were asked of you earlier, specifically the use of bots by authoritarian regimes and also the use of troll farms by Russia, and wanted to know if you could be more specific in terms of how Google is going to respond. In other words, will you expand your staff or modify the algorithms in an effort to identify and eradicate the online trolls? And then in terms of the flooding that takes place with bots, what specifically will you do to address this?
This is something we actually face across the set of products we do today, be it our ad systems, be it our search products people are trying to spam, and be it YouTube and so on. So in general, we have built systems over the years to detect anomalous traffic patterns and mitigate that. And we also learn, we collaborate with others. Law enforcement has been very helpful to us in this regard.
So if the example of the bots where you have, I mean, I saw one example where there was one day 125 dislikes and the next day there were 84,000. How do you respond in a situation like that where it's obviously it's done purposely?
So when we see view count manipulation of likes, dislikes, and either we get reports or we detect in our systems spikes in those activities, which which make it clear that it's not humans doing it. We detect it, we treat it as spam or abuse of our systems.
So you have staff dedicated to looking at that?
Yeah, both. We have our algorithms, AI systems, and manual reviewers, and we are staffing up our manual reviewers significantly over the past couple of years. And so we do it comprehensively across all those things.
So anticipating what took place in 2016 happening again, and this is specifically regarding what Russia did to foment racial tensions in the United States, and wanting to know how you are responding to that, where they called for, fake protest, either to get African Americans to turn out to protest something that was fake, or to have white supremacists be ginned up to attack communities of color. So specifically, what is Google doing to respond to that?
We mainly saw, with respect to Russia, limited improper activity on our ad platforms. But in general, we are not a social networking company across the products we do. It's an area we haven't done well as a company. So we typically aren't connecting groups of people, and that's not how Google mainly works today. And so we haven't seen that kind of activities on our platforms. But we are vigilant and, and happy to share any findings which come through as we look into it more.
So I also wanted to ask you a couple of questions about online creators of color. where mainstream media outlets often fail to cater to communities of color with relatable content or resolve lingering issues of underrepresentation or misrepresentation. Communities of color have sought out digital mediums to tell their stories, and in some cases, this has been very successful, and it's led to larger networks recognizing the talent, and in other cases, it's given a platform to voices that would otherwise be silenced. So I wanted to know what policies Google might be developing to put in place to ensure that the voice of online creators can expand.
YouTube has a lot of community outreach programs. We partner with other organizations who do important work in this area. But today, when we look at YouTube, we do see a platform with a very diverse set of perspectives and opinions. It's partly the strength of the platform and the reach it provides to voices. And
Could I get the information about your outreach, specifically who you do outreach to? That would be very helpful.
We'd be very happy to do that.
And I yield back my time to Representative Deutsch.
Thanks. I thank my friend from California. Mr. Pichai, I just wanted to finish up. Again, appreciate you being here. And I wanted to follow up on something that the chairman started our hearing with, and that was a question about information collected by Google. I think the report that he referred to talked about information collected specifically on Android phones, even if those phones aren't on Wi-Fi or the cell service isn't on. Is that something that happens?
Congressman, it's not clear to me how something when there's no connectivity would happen, but we haven't.
I'm sorry.
So I'm aware of those concerns. We haven't been able to substantiate those specific findings.
You're looking into those findings, though?
There's an area where we are, our goal is to, we're trying to help users with the information they want. Today, there are many cases, users give us feedback. Part of what we're trying to do is they want us to be location aware when they get their...
I understand, but you're not aware of data being collected while the phone is not connected to either cell service or Wi-Fi.
Yeah, there may be specific instances. For example, GPS may be working, and so it depends on the specifics. But in general, no.
And so finally, the question is, if that information is, if that's possible, if you learn that it is happening, and I would love you to share that with us, if you learn that's happening, and the information then when the customer turns on his or her cell service, if that information is then sent back to your company on their data plan, a lot of people obviously have limited data plans. When you look at this, if you could also look at whether, when the information is sent back to the extent it's happening, that it might cause some people to go over their limits, thereby costing them more on their monthly bill, that would be helpful information as well.
That's good feedback. We will.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Pichai. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Pichai, for being here. Look, there is an understanding, I think it's come across from everyone here, and it's a saying that I've sort of lived by most of my adult life, and I think most people get. Perception is reality. Now, you can disagree with the perception, you can disagree with the reality, but at a certain point in time, as you've even heard from many of the folks discussing on both sides of the aisle today, there's several perceptions that are going on what's being stored, what's not being stored, and how that is, or how that data and that privacy issue, and also the effects or the outcomes of the searches are made. Now, one of the other issues, not just Google itself, but also YouTube, there's another issue that I will not touch today, but probably will do some questions on, is the issue of content and the issue of how that is stolen in many cases and how that could be worked on. Those are issues we'll deal with in another setting. We've talked about this. But I want to go through several questions because it's been discussed a lot about what you collect and what you don't collect. So the next few questions will be yes, no questions. I'm not trying to trick you here. It's simply what do you collect and how do you collect it, okay? In dealing with Google, do you or do you not collect identifiers like name, age, and address? Yes or no?
If you're creating an account, yes, and using an account, yes.
Yes. Specific search histories when a person types something into a search bar?
If you have search history turned on, yes.
Device identifiers like IP address or IMEI?
Depending on the situation, we could be collecting it, yes.
GPS signals, Wi-Fi signals, Bluetooth beacons?
Would depend on the specifics, but there may be situations, yes.
GPS, yes.
Yes, if you have location.
Voice and conversations when using Google Voice products?
We give an option to turn on or off. And
But if a person didn't know it, voice in conversations when using Google Voice products. Yes.
we only record when they initiated with OK Google and then say the terms after.
Contents of emails and Google documents.
We store the data, but we don't read or look at your Gmail.
But you have access to them.
As a company, we have access to them, yes.
So you could. Saying you don't or don't. I'm not asking do you or don't. I'm saying you could, though there is a possibility.
We have clear established policies on how we would do that data.
And their privacy policy, speaking of that, has changed 28 times, including 8 times since January 2016. So I think the policies, and this is why I'm asking these questions. Is there any type or origin of data which Google would refuse to collect that is not already prohibited by laws like COPA or HIPAA?
And there are many categories of information today. We are particular about anything to do with health data.
And those are covered under those. Anything that you would not collect outside of the 2 that I named, which are generally accepted as things you cannot collect.
There are many things which we don't collect. For example, we don't collect, you could have a product like Google Home. We won't collect conversations unless you specifically ask us to. So you ask a question. And so we definitely are very careful and minimize the data we need to provide the service back to our users.
I'm glad you mentioned data minimization. We'll get to that in just a second. How long do you keep the data that you have captured?
Today, we give you the choice of whether you want to store the data or not. But if you store the data, from the time you turn it on, we store it for you.
Okay, well, let me ask a question here. For all this has been discussed, age identifiers, search histories, all these things. And for how many would you say, let me just say, you've made an interesting question. How many people actually understand that they can actually cut this off?
We remind people, and every day 20 million people come and make changes in these settings. So we see robust activity.
When you control 95% of searches, you control this in a very large way. I would say the vast majority, not the most sophisticated, not the ones in a certain age demographic, are not as familiar with this as, say, some who work in the industry or at least around the industry. Would that not be a fair statement?
If you could repeat that, Congressman, sorry.
I'll get back to it. Earlier it was said that identifiers such as age, name, and address are treated differently. If that is true, how are you treating them differently, and is the same data collection process still done? How is it treated differently than maybe some of these others that we have spoke of that came, I think, from Mr. Deutsch's discussions, such as locators and things like that?
We offer different controls for that. So, for example, for location, we give specific controls. For your voice activity, we give specific controls. We are trying to meet users' expectations. And so, for example, some people may want their search history to be available, but they don't want YouTube history to be recorded. So we give those choices to our users.
One of the general dynamics of most of this tech industry and those who collect data is data minimization. You brought it up just a few minutes ago. The issue that I have, and it was in March of this year, a security researcher actually downloaded his, quote, Google Takeout. This is probably there. It was 5.5 gigabyte. This is not just a few names and addresses and where you went. Why, number one, does Google need all this information? We can answer that in the fact that 86% of your revenue comes from advertising, so we know you manipulate the data in some ways. However, can you explain what you do to minimize this data, which is generally an accepted standard practice among those who collect data?
Our goal is, but we are providing, for example, if we are providing you a service like Gmail, which we have done for 15 years, that data, we need to store it for our users, so they expect us to. So we are trying hard to match users' expectations. We don't need, our data for advertising, as I said earlier, most of it comes from just the keywords you type. And so, we need minimal data to do advertising. We give you options to turn ads personalization off. We store most of the data we do today to help give users the experience they want, and that's what we're trying to do.
I'm going to go back to where I started. Perception is reality. The amount of data being collected here, how it is being used, how you monetize, basically the flow of information that you have, and the monetization of that is a concern. I think the perception of how it is used and from what side of the aisle is something that this committee, I think, will take up and continue to process. But I think when most people deal with this, what I said earlier, I'm not sure that in the broad scope of things, simply clicking yes especially in a society today in which some of these things, and especially that was talked about mobile, which we've not delved into even further, is going to open up a much larger situation in which is not just simply monetizing data, it's actually using information that can be then used by either law enforcement or others in legal proceedings that can then be used against them, that they're not going to understand exactly what is going on. With that, my time has expired, and I'll yield.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline.
Thank you,
5
Mr.
minutes.
Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Pichai, for being here. In 2006, Internet pioneer Vint Cerf testified on behalf of Google that the open Internet was designed so that no central gatekeeper could exert its control to discriminate against rivals, consumers, or other businesses. Since then, it's become increasingly clear that this virtuous cycle of innovation is fundamentally threatened by the dominance of a few powerful companies. Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, made this point clear in an open letter earlier this year where he warned that the open Internet has been compressed under the weight of a few dominant platforms that have the ability to harm competition and control which ideas and opinions are seen and shared online. Along with 83% of Americans, I strongly support an open, decentralized Internet that is free of powerful gatekeepers with the ability to discriminate against rivals, threaten innovation, or harm consumers. With that in mind, I'm deeply concerned by reports of Google's discriminatory conduct in the market for Internet search. According to findings by the European Commission, Google has harmed the competitive process by favoring its own products and services over rivals, by deprioritizing or delisting competitors' content. And so my first question, Mr. Pichai, is as a proponent of Internet openness, will Google commit to ending the discrimination against rivals and other businesses through Google's products?
Congressman, with respect, I disagree with that characterization. We provide users with the best experience they are looking for, the most relevant information, and that's our true north, and that's how we approach our products.
But does that include the use of discriminatory practices? Is that part of your business model?
Definitely not. And in the European Commission, we are appealing that decision. When they looked at shopping as a category, they excluded Amazon as a potential entrant in the space. So the specifics matter here. We are interested in providing users with the best information they are looking for, be it from another company and be it from a competitor. That's what we are interested in doing.
Well, I strongly believe in structural antitrust enforcement. I also plan to work with the Federal Trade Commission to develop legislation to address this type of discriminatory conduct online. Will Google commit to working together with Congress on legislative proposals designed to ensure that online firms with significant market power are not able to harm the competitive process through discriminatory conduct?
We're happy to engage constructively on legislation around any of these areas.
Thank you. I'd like now to turn to the question of China. Mr. Pichai, the operating environment in China has deteriorated with respect to surveillance, censorship, and the like since Google first made the decision in 2010 to leave. In September, I sent you a letter along with 15 other colleagues raising serious concerns about reports that Google is planning to re-enter the Chinese market with an app-based search engine that would likely have to comply with strict censorship and surveillance requirements imposed by the Chinese government. Since then, a widespread chorus of opposition to such a move has emerged, including from lawmakers, leading human rights activists, and a group of Google's own employees. The environment has deteriorated. Your launching an app in that environment would seem to be completely inconsistent with Google's recently launched AI principles, which say you will not design or deploy technologies whose, and I quote, purpose contravenes widely accepted principles of international law and human rights. It's hard for me to imagine you could operate in the Chinese market under the current government framework and maintain a commitment to universal values such as freedom of expression and personal privacy. So I want to ask very specifically, are any employees currently having product meetings on this Chinese project? And if not, when did those end?
We have undertaken an internal effort, but right now there are no plans to launch a search service in China, as I said earlier.
Are there any current discussions with any member of the Chinese government on launching this app?
Currently, we are not in discussions around launching a search product in China.
Are there any current discussions with members of the Chinese government about this?
This effort currently is an internal effort, and I'm happy to consult as well as be transparent to the extent we take steps towards launching a product in China.
And who at Google is leading the Dragonfly effort?
It's a our efforts around building search, it's undertaken by our search teams, but these are distributed efforts. It's a limited effort internally currently.
Will you, Mr. Pichai, rule out launching a tool for surveillance and censorship in China while you are CEO of Google?
Congressman, I commit to engaging. One of the things which is important to us as a company, we have a stated mission of providing users with information. And so we think it's in our duty to explore possibilities to give users access to information. And, I have that commitment, but, as I said earlier on this, we'll be very thoughtful and we will engage widely as we make progress.
Well, I appreciate that. And let me be clear, this goes beyond Google and frankly beyond China. At a moment of rising authoritarianism around the world, when more leaders are using surveillance, censorship, and repression against their own people, we're in a moment that we must reassert American moral leadership. And I think it's important that because other countries will look at that relationship. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I'd ask unanimous consent to submit for the record the letter of 15 colleagues and I sent to Mr. Pichai, his response, and a letter from more than 50 human and civil rights organizations opposing the launch of a censored Google search engine for the Chinese market. And would just note, Mr. Chairman, that in the submission of this for unanimous consent, the NGO letter reports that, and I quote, the Chinese government is actively promoting its model of pervasive digital censorship and surveillance around the world. Many governments look to China's example, and a major industry leader's acquiescence to such demands will likely cause many other regimes to follow China's lead, provoking a race to the bottom in standards. It would also undermine efforts by Google and other companies to resist government surveillance requests in order to protect users' privacy and security, emboldening state intelligence and security agencies to demand greater access to user data. So the implications, Mr. Pichai, as you understand, are well beyond China. And I'd ask that they be made a part of the record.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Getz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have you ever launched an investigation into whether political bias is impacting the consumer experience?
Congressman, we do, to the extent there are concerns, we look into them, and
So have you expressly launched an investigation into political bias of your employees?
On our employees, you said?
Yes.
To the extent, we always take any allegations around code of conduct across every issue seriously, and we look into them.
You said to me yesterday that as it relates to political bias, you haven't launched those investigations because there are so many redundancies and there is so much peer review that would not be possible. Is that still your testimony today?
Congressman, yes, it's the way our processes work. If you need to make a change in our algorithms, there are several steps in the process, including launch committees and user testing and our rater guideline evaluation.
But at your company, your employees can get together and chat in groups, right? Google groups?
Yes, they can.
And one of those groups is the Civil Rights Group, right?
We have many employee resource groups on which they can participate in conversations, yes.
Have you ever looked into the conversation into the Resist group?
Congressman, no.
Is that a surprise to you that there's a Resist group?
I'm not aware whether such a group exists or not.
If there was a Resist group, would that be the type of thing that you would want to look into?
We have clear policies around how our products are built. And
no, if there's a Resist, you know that the Resist movement is a movement built to resist the agenda of President Trump. If there's a Resist group within your company where groups of employees, not one, are getting together within that group to engage in discourse on company time with company infrastructure, does that strike you as the type of thing you would want to investigate?
Congressman, I'm not aware of any such group. None like that has been brought to my attention, and happy to follow up to, and understand the concern better.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a document from what purports to be Google employee Miles Borins, which is opposed to the Google group Resist.
Without objection, so ordered.
I'm also reading now from the discussion that occurred over Breitbart and Google Ads, and I'm quoting from one of your employees who purportedly posted, anyone want to hold their nose and look through Breitbart.com for hate speech? Why would someone need to hold their nose to do that work?
Congressman, today we have 90,000 employees, and they communicate in forums. As a company, we have allowed freedom of expression, And we don't stand or condone, comments expressed in these things. We are very clear about our policies as to how we build our products, and we serve our publishers that way.
Well, if you haven't launched an investigation in any of your employees, because it would take a group of employees to engage in improper conduct, and if those groups of employees are engaging in discussion on your platform, and if one of those platform groups is Resist, and if on that Resist movement site or any other sites in your platform, there's discussion of suppressing conservative speech, why would that not be something that you would launch an internal investigation in, publish the reports, sanction those employees that may or may not be engaged in improper conduct, so that we can all have greater comfort in the user experience?
Congressman, first of all, I want to assure you, we have checks and balances so that employees, and we not just on this issue, across any issue, we protect the sanctity of our systems, our product development process, and we would do that.
How can I have confidence that you're protecting the sanctity of your system when you don't even know that your employees are getting together on your own company's infrastructure to talk about political activity?
In general, we always assume our systems are designed. We assume there could be bad intent. So we've designed from first principles because, for security reasons, both externally and internally, at any given moment, we assume that somebody may be acting in bad faith. And that's how we have designed our systems with all the protections in place. We need to do that for our security of our systems, and it's a first principles approach.
So if your assumption is that people can act in bad faith, why then have you not launched an investigation into the communications that seem to indicate a desire to suppress conservative political movements and conservative voices?
If there are allegations around discussions which are specific with the intent of manipulating our products, we would conduct an investigation.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. The Wall Street Journal reported that your workers were discussing tweaking search terms to frame the discussion over the travel ban. Did you perform an investigation into that allegation?
We looked into it. There was no attempt at anything to influence our products. There are at times during important news events, for example, during events like hurricanes, etc., we have a set of tools, crisis response tools. During the travel ban, even the Department of Homeland Security was looking to put out information because there was some confusion around the event. So there was some discussion around things like that too. And so,
well, I would strongly suggest that one of the crisis response tools that you use is in an investigation into the discourse of your employees on resisting the Trump presidency, resisting the Trump agenda, and then smothering some of the conservative outlets that seek to amplify that content. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Ms. Swalwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Pichai. I represent a congressional district in the San Francisco Bay Area where a number of my constituents work at Google, and was hoping we could dive into some concerns that I hear from them, but also that I hear from constituents who just have concerns about privacy. Does the United States need a national privacy law?
Congressman, I'm of the view, given how important privacy is, that we are better off with more of a single overarching.
Excuse me, would you mind moving the microphone in front of your mouth so we can hear you better? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm of the opinion that we are better off with more of an overarching, data protection framework, which for users, and I think that would be good to do.
And in Europe, just last year, they implemented the General Data Protection Regulation, known as GDPR, and the goals were for consumers to know, to understand, and consent. And would you agree that if there was a framework in the United States to have a national privacy law, that would be the critical framework to have: know, understand, and consent?
We've had quite a bit of experience now working with GDPR, and we have done it for many, many months. And, I think there are, I think it's a well thought out, crafted piece of legislation. I do think there's some value for companies to have consistent global regulations. I think it's also important for users as they navigate services globally. And so I do see value in aligning where we can.
Mr. Pichai, as part of Russia's attack on our democracy in 2016, it used ads on your platform, on Facebook's platform, on Twitter's platform, and money was provided in rubles and from Russia addresses. What has Google done to make sure this doesn't happen again? And just last week, Secretary Mattis confirmed that Russia continued its attack on our democracy in the most recent midterm elections.
Congressman, as I said earlier, it's an area where we invest a lot. I mean, we did see limited improper activity, and obviously we learned from that. We've been very transparent with our findings. Leading up over the past couple of years, anytime we have found other activity, which is material, we disclose it, and we are constantly evolving the practices we do. But I do say our efforts have been pretty successful so far. Google as a whole through both our election cycles. But it's an area where it's never enough, and so you're constantly vigilant and doing more.
And Mr. Pichai, I don't think anyone disagrees that seeing an answer on a results page for certain queries can be useful. For example, if I type in, what is 25 times 15, and Google spits out 375, that's useful. But today, if my wife was to search for a pediatrician in Dublin, California, instead of being matched with the most relevant information from across the web, according to Google's algorithms, my wife or any mom would see a map that is powered by Google's ecosystem of local reviews. And in response to claims that Google has put its own results ahead of its competitors, when its PageRank algorithm believes the competitors should be ranked higher, Google has told certain international enforcers that local search results come from a specialized index, which is distinct from its organic web index. And I was hoping today you could clarify for me, is it technically possible for Google to compare local business content it collects against that of content collected by third-party services using a PageRank-like quality score?
We employ a wide variety of signals. We are interested in providing users. We respond to user feedback. So as a user, you could be on a mobile phone with very limited connectivity. You could be a busy parent on your way, and you're checking for some information, maybe trying to find a doctor because your kid is sick. And so we are looking to see how we can get that information to you as quickly as possible. That's the use case which drives our product development. And if that information is best available from another company, we make it available. There are times we are able to provide that information because we have better information. And so we are constantly looking, and we do that to the best of our ability.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. At this time, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pichai, we want to thank you for appearing today and for taking the time to answer and meet with us individually, answer our questions. I think you and I both agree it's important for your company and for the people for us to have this public hearing and to get all this information on the record, so to speak. So as we discussed in my office yesterday, my conservative colleagues and I are fierce advocates of limited government. And we're also committed guardians of free speech and the free marketplace of ideas. We do not want to impose burdensome government regulations on your industry. However, we do believe we have an affirmative duty to ensure that the engine that processes as much, as we've said today, 90% of all internet searches is never used to unfairly censor conservative viewpoints or suppress political views. Your challenge today, and in the days ahead, is to convince the members of this body that Google and your industry peers will implement your own sufficient safeguards and solutions to this problem so that the government doesn't have to intervene. Here's a question. In previous hearings and discussions, Google has described the Trusted Flagger program as a source for recommending content be removed from your platform. Recently, Google released a transparency report on content removal, which revealed that out of the 7.7 million automated flagging removals from your platform, YouTube, around 70% of that content was removed before it had received any views from the public. Here's the question. How does Google ensure that content removed in the automated process is not merely because of philosophical or political differences?
Congressman, it's an important question. As you said, YouTube is committed to being a platform for freedom of expression, and we go to great lengths to do that. We only handle videos in the areas of clearly defined policies we have. We do have automated systems, but we assess it, we later spot check it to make sure the system is working as intended. We respond to feedback. As content creators, you can appeal if you think something was removed erroneously. But it's really important to us that we provide a platform for freedom of expression, but enforce the rules of the road on areas where we have said, but we are very transparent about the areas and the clear policies with which we do those things.
You've spoken a lot today about objectivity. That's the goal. We applaud and appreciate that. As you know, Alphabet's incubator Jigsaw has introduced Perspective. It's a tool that uses machine learning to filter online discussions for, quote, toxicity, unquote. This to me raises issues of how Google's parent company is using machine learning to filter speech that is viewed as unproductive, such as ad hominem attacks or offensive language or the like. When creating a tool like Perspective, what steps is Google taking to protect conservative viewpoints from being considered toxic by subjective reviewers as the program progresses?
Congressman, Perspective provided by one of our sister organizations, Jigsaw, it's a platform for publishers to use. So the publishers get to define what they want acceptable or not, and then that's what the tool provides for them. But I think your point is valid. I mean, we don't want to be in the position of just editorializing publisher content, and we are just providing a tool for publishers to better drive the content on their platforms.
You mentioned the appeals process if a content provider has their material flagged. How quick does that appeals process work? In other words, what's the review period?
I think it varies. We prioritize areas which are sensitive. For example, areas like terrorism is something we prioritize very significantly and higher up in the queue. But we are ramping up our resources, and our goal is to do it as soon as possible. But sometimes it can be a matter of hours. If it's areas around copyright, we have implemented Content ID. We have a system by which we can automatically detect and respond right away back to copyright owners. So it's a constant work in progress.
In the committee's last hearing with Google's Ms. Juniper Downs, we discussed this. I raised the case of the Alliance Defending Freedom's content being removed after being reported by a trusted flagger on YouTube. The flagging organization was the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has a kind of an infamous reputation for being, I would say, a radical left organization that opposes conservative viewpoints. What criteria does Google use when granting trusted flagger status to third parties such as the SPLC?
Today we first want to clarify one thing. Our trusted flaggers don't remove content. They can flag content for us to review, and we review flag content. It's mostly used by law enforcement, many nonprofit agencies in areas, important areas like child safety, terrorism, and so on. Southern Poverty Law Center is a trusted flagger. People can register. Last we checked, they've never flagged a single video on our platform. We have reached out to a wide variety of organizations, including conservative organizations. We would be happy to take your suggestions to add organizations as trusted flaggers.
Appreciate that. We need a little objectivity in the reviewers, and I'll yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Liu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is now the fourth hearing in a series of ridiculous hearings on the free speech of internet companies. A significant portion of this hearing was a waste of time because the First Amendment protects private individuals and corporations' free speech rights. Now, there are things that Google does unrelated to speech that I disagree with. But when it comes to search algorithms, your prioritization, what videos you want to show, the First Amendment protects you. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Some of them are fairly basic, and I apologize, but I feel like I have to educate some of my colleagues on how the U.S. Constitution works, and feel free to answer yes or no. So my first question is, we here on the Judiciary Committee are the government, and Google is a corporation, correct? Yes or no?
Yes.
All right. The First Amendment limits what government can do in regulating the content of speech. It does not limit Google, but Google does have to follow corporate laws and other laws. And under those laws, you and your board of directors have a fiduciary duty to your shareholders, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And one of the ways that Google generates a profit is when consumers use your search engine, they watch videos, some of them click on ads, they use your applications. Isn't that one way you generate profit?
That's one of the business models
okay.
we use.
And if consumers were not getting the search results they wanted, or not getting the videos they wanted to see, they might start moving to your competitors. Isn't that right?
Every Monday when I run my management meetings, yes, we worry about, users have a lot of choices, so we work hard to earn their trust every week.
And so let's say you figure out that the number one thing users want to see are dog and cat videos. Under the U.S. Constitution, you have the absolute right to promote dog and cat videos. I'm not saying you do that, but you do have the right to do that if you want to do. Isn't that correct?
Congressman, I'm not the expert on First Amendment, but generally I think that's right.
I thank you. So last week when I got notice we're going to have another one of these hearings, I did a search on Google. I searched for Congressman Steve Scalise. He is a Republican. And I hit the news tab. And the first 4 articles that come up are generally pretty positive. The first one is from Town Hall, a generally conservative publication, about his book, Back in the Game. Second article is also about his book, Back in the Game. Third is about him talking about election results. Fourth is from Fox, another positive article about his book, Back in the Game. You don't have a group of people at Google, they're sitting there thinking, hey, we like Steve Scalise, so we're going to generate positive articles on these search results. That's not what's happening, right?
I'm very glad to see Congressman Steve Scalise fully recovered and back, but we don't deal with individual queries and, with any viewpoint, and so these are our algorithms.
Nowhere in your programming code does Congressman Steve Scalise even show up, isn't that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Now I'm going to do a real-time Google search for a very similar term. I'm going to change one word. So I'm going to search for Congressman Steve King. I'm going to hit the news tab. First article that pops up is from ABC News. It says, Steve King's racist immigration talk prompts calls for congressional censure. That's a negative article. But you don't have a group of people at Google sitting there thinking and trying to modify search results. Every time Steve King comes up, a negative article appears. That's not what's happening, right?
We always operate for any query with the same set of principles. We are trying to reflect what is currently, if it is newsworthy, what is currently being discussed about that phrase.
Thank you. So let me just conclude here by stating the obvious. If you want positive search results, do positive things. If you don't want negative search results, don't do negative things. And to some of my colleagues across the aisle, if you're getting bad press articles and bad search results, don't blame Google or Facebook or Twitter. Consider blaming yourself. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here, Mr. Pichai. I don't disagree with one point made by the last interrogator. Questioner, let's call him questioner, that's easier to say. In the sense that I think you have a First Amendment right to do what you guys want to do. So you're a private company. There's very few constraints on the First Amendment, although there are lots of constraints ultimately when we start looking at it, everything from libel to slander to threatening, intimidating, to yelling fire in a crowded theater. We have constraints on First Amendment speech. But you've seemed, as we've gone through here today, to say that Google doesn't have bias. You yourself have said you personally don't have bias or animus, and you've also tried to implement policies to prevent bias and animus as well. Isn't that true?
Yeah, we work hard to build our products in a neutral way, and I'm committed to doing it that way.
Right, and in some respects, we haven't heard much discussion about the human intersection with the creation or manipulation or editing of algorithms. But there is human interaction with humans create the algorithms, and you might have some artificial intelligence that might adduce some additional information as it goes. But originally, the creativity comes from the humans, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, how can we be assured that foreign adversaries will not use your platform against Americans or American national interests?
We always worry about that as a threat vector, and this is why we make sure, the best way we do it, when we are building our products, we don't rely on, one person or groups of people to be able to do it. We follow a set of robust process, including tests and validation, both from users. We get feedback from users, and we use raters externally to evaluate. And we do this. For example, our search raters in the U.S. are there in all the 50 states of the U.S. We geographically distribute them so that we really get the perspectives of everyone around the country.
Well, that doesn't really get to the answering my question of security assurance. And so I guess if manipulation of your information systems was not possible or effective, we would not be seeing so many countries investing in the capability of manipulation, whether it's Russians or Chinese or Iranians or others that are, attempting to manipulate your system?
And there may be attempts to use our products and services. So, for example, because we provide advertising products, and what we saw in the 2016 election was, limited activity, but it's improper. 2 accounts related to Russia, advertised using our platforms.
That totaled $4,700, I think you said.
Yeah, so that's an example of, the kind of threat we see, and, it's something we are working hard to mitigate and avoid.
Okay, and so I guess I would say that it looks like you guys have a policy of do no evil, right? Is that fair to say?
It's not our official policy, but, it's a statement which has been communicated by us internally.
And other people have brought up the work that you may or may not be doing in China, and I want a clarification of that. Are you looking to expand in China and cooperate with the Chinese government on a platform release in China?
To the question, it's about search. Right now, we have no plans to launch search in China. We have always, over the years, explored how best we can continue to serve users in China, but that's what we are doing.
Are you doing anything with the data share with the Chinese government?
Today, we don't operate our services which involve user data, like Google Search or Gmail in China, and so no.
So you're telling me nothing at all then with China?
We do provide, for example, Android, which is an operating system. We work with partners around the world, and there are OEM manufacturers around the world, including in China.
So manufacturers, but beyond manufacturers, any other platform use?
We don't have any special agreements on user data today with
the Chinese government?
That's right.
Okay. Do you share the data that you collect on civilians with the United States federal government?
We comply with valid law enforcement request, and and with due process, we comply with valid law enforcement.
What's the extent of that?
We publish a transparency report in which we give insights into the law enforcement requests we have gotten and our and our compliance there.
The last question I have, real quickly. In May 2016, Google banned all ads by payday lenders, even though it invested in LendUp, which is effectively a payday lender. And it banned ads by competitors. Is that a normal practice?
Congressman, we undertook ad policies in that particular area because we saw evidence of misuse, and we had gotten a lot of feedback, and that's what we reacted to.
Did you ban your own LendUp app?
I don't think Google is involved. I think one of our sister companies is has an investment in
LendUp. Right.
I think that's my understanding.
Okay,
was it banned?
The gentleman's time has expired.
I can follow up. I'm not aware of the specifics there. Happy to follow up.
Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, and thank you for your testimony today. Do you know what frazzle drip is?
I'm not aware of the specifics about it. I heard some references about it from my team over the past 24 hours.
I just learned about it in the Washington Post this morning. There's an article with this headline, "A Platform for Free Speech That Extremists Routinely Exploit." And in it, the article explains that the recommendation engine for YouTube, which is owned by Google, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. The recommendation engine for YouTube recently suggested videos claiming that politicians, celebrities, and other elite figures were sexually abusing or consuming the remains of children, often in satanic rituals, according to watchdog group Algo Transparency. The claims echo and often cite the discredited Pizzagate conspiracy, which 2 years ago led to a man firing shots into a Northwest Washington, D.C. pizzeria in search of children he believed were being held as sex slaves by Democratic Party leaders. One recent variation on the theory, which began spreading on YouTube this spring, claimed that Democrat Hillary Clinton and her longtime aide Huma Abedin had sexually assaulted a girl and drank her blood, a conspiracy theory its proponents dubbed frazzle drip. Now, the article goes on to describe how this frazzle drip conspiracy is all over YouTube, and some of the frazzle drip clips purport to show grainy images of Clinton and Abedin committing crimes and speak of invoking the death penalty. One video, which has been viewed 77,000 times and remains online today, has a voiceover that says, "Will these children become the dessert at the conclusion of the meal?" So and this is just one example that they use of extreme right and paranoid conspiracy groups using YouTube as a place to trade their videos and to promote propaganda. What is your company policy on that, and are you trying to deal with it?
You know, we are constantly undertaking effort to deal with misinformation, but you know, we have clearly stated policies, and we have made lots of progress in many of the areas where, you know, over the past year. So, for example, in areas like terrorism, child safety, and so on, we are looking to do more. You know, this was a recent thing, but I'm committed to following up on it and making sure we are evaluating these against our policies. But it's an area we acknowledge there's more work to be done, and you know, and we'll definitely continue doing that.
One of the videos discussed included images of a body on a table before restrained children and of Hillary Clinton with a bloodied mouth and fangs claiming that she and Abedin drank the blood of their victim. That was removed, but then another consisting of an exact copy of the video remained online, or apparently remains online. I mean, is your basic position that this is something you want to try to do something about, but basically there's just an avalanche of such material and there's really nothing that can be done, and it should be buyer beware or consumer beware when you go on YouTube?
You know, we do grapple with difficult issues. Maybe we have to look at it on a video-by-video basis, and we have clearly stated policies. So we would need to evaluate whether the video, the specific video, violates any of our policies. And we do strive to do it for the volume of content we do get. And, you know, we get around 400 hours of video every minute. But it's our responsibility, I think, to make sure, you know, YouTube is a platform for freedom of expression, but it's responsible and contributes positively to society.
Some of my colleagues are upset about negative references to Donald Trump, not Hillary Clinton or not Barack Obama. And obviously, you know, one potential strategy today is to try to heckle you into somehow playing favorites with Donald Trump and Republicans. I think that that would be a silly and ridiculous takeaway from this. On the other hand, there is material which is a true public danger. You know, you've got a right to have whatever politics you have. I mean, we could subpoena Fox News and bring them in here and beat them up about how 90% of the references on Fox News to Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton are negative, but they've got that right under the First Amendment. You've got a right under the First Amendment to have whatever political views you've got. But I think the point at which it becomes a matter of serious public interest is when your communications vehicle is being used to promote propaganda that leads to violent events, like the guy showing up in the Pizzagate conspiracy case. And so I guess my question is, are you taking that threat seriously?
I mean, gentleman's time is expiring, but you can answer the question.
Thank you. We have very clear policies against hate speech, things which could incite harm or hatred or violence. And, you know, that's an area where we are clearly taking a lot of action. But I want to acknowledge there is more work to be done. And, you know, with our growth comes more responsibility, and we are committed to doing better as we invest more in this area.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. Handel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for being here, Mr. Pichai. For years, the Federal Trade Commission, on a bipartisan basis, has affirmed that precise geolocation information is considered highly, highly sensitive, and that consumers must opt in to that. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I agree with that.
Do you think there's other information, privacy information of consumers that should also be required to have opt-in versus opt-out?
In general, I think a framework for privacy in which users have a sense of transparency, control, and choice, and have clear understanding of the trade-offs they need to make, I think is very good for consumers, and we would support that.
Okay. And speaking of privacy and transparency, I'm trying to understand the difference between a paying customer for the Google Suites versus the free Gmail. So when it comes to data collection, are the criteria and the rules the same if you're on Google Suites versus Gmail?
Google Suite is a broader suite of products than Gmail alone. You know, we have very specific policies around Gmail. In general, we don't, as a company, we don't read your Gmail unless we have express consent from you for example, to investigate security or abuse related to an account. On G Suite, we provide G Suite across many instances. We have clear policies against that too. We don't use...
Right, but what I'm asking is, are the policies different?
We don't distinguish between, so for example, today we provide G Suite for free to many educational institutions. We don't use that data from within G Suite for advertising.
You collect it.
Well, we store, G Suite involves user documents, be it documents or Gmail. So we store it for the user so that they can access it.
And no one in your company has access to it?
People,
or they do have access?
We have policies that they cannot access it unless they have specific consent from the user for a specific situation.
Okay. What would be one of those reasons?
For example, you may want to investigate fraudulent activity related to your account, and we may ask for your permission to do that. There may be a valid law enforcement requirement which we have to comply with.
All right. I'm going to go back to Google Takeout, which my colleague from Georgia asked about earlier. I would say that the average person probably has never heard of Google Takeout until recently. So when did it become available?
We started this effort, I'm aware of it as early as over 10 years ago, and we started building for many of our products. We started an office in Chicago with the express goal of providing users with this takeout capabilities. I think we were quite unique in starting to work on that as a company, but there's more effort we plan to do there.
Who has access to it?
This is for users. So for example, if you decide to stop your Gmail account and you go with another email provider, being able to take your Gmail data with you, and that's what it's designed for.
And
Takeout is for users, yeah.
But no one from within Google or any other place can come in to Google Takeout and get your information?
No, it's expressly designed for consumers to take their data with them.
I understand what it's designed for. I'm asking who practically can get access to it.
We have very strict limitations on access to sensitive...
Oh, so it's more than just, if I were going to Google Takeout for Karen Handel, I'm not the only person who has access to my Google Takeout?
You are the only person who can take out your data, but I'm just saying, you asked about internal systems. We have clear policies. Employees can't go looking at user data unless there are a narrow set of circumstances which may involve either consent from the user or legal situations, etc.
All right. Is it free?
Is takeout
your data?
Yes, it is free.
So when a person takes their data out, or they want to go through and clean up privacy and they delete, is it really deleted or is it just hidden?
Depending on the service, if you're terminating your account and you delete the data, it will take some time, and we communicate that to propagate through our systems and get removed, but we follow through on that.
But it's deleted. It's not just hidden from sight.
It's deleted. That's
okay,
right.
One last question. You said that your company embarked on an initiative to register people to vote. How did you do that, and who did you target, and in what states?
So for example, during registration windows, we highlight, we give people information about where to register. We do these things representatively for all our users across the U.S. And all indications are that the participation is uniformly high across our user base. So we do this with the express goal of...
But how did you do it? Did you send out links? Did you send out voter registration forms to people?
The gentlelady's time has expired, but you can answer the question.
For example, on the Google homepage, we may say, check where your polling place is. And as a user, you can click on it, and we give you the location of your closest polling locations and the opening times available to you. That's an example.
I'll be following up on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Washington State, Ms. Chapel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Pichai, for coming to testify before us. I, for one, am thrilled that you as a company encourage people to vote. I think we should all do that. I'd love to see Election Day as a holiday. I've been deeply concerned for some time about employers mandating forced arbitration rather than allowing for people to pursue justice. And forcing people into arbitration when they've already experienced a violation of their basic rights, I think, is a deep injustice, and it subjects people who have already been victimized to further victimization. And we've seen research that shows that it discourages people from coming forward to report abuses to begin with. There are very successful companies in your field, including companies like Salesforce, that have thrived while foregoing forced arbitration contracts and clauses. And I think that we can all agree that the argument that eliminating forced arbitration threatens innovation should be dismissed out of hand. Eliminating forced arbitration has been a shared priority by my colleagues on this committee, as evidenced by the fact that our ranking member, Jerry Nadler, as well as Hank Johnson, David Cicilline, and I have all introduced legislation to end the practice. And I was very heartened to see that Google ended forced arbitration, but only in the context of sexual harassment. And so I hope you agree with me that upholding people's fundamental right to safety in the workplace and freedom from discrimination, whether it's based on gender or sexual orientation or race or religion or any other metric, really benefits all of us. And so I wanted to point out that it's particularly critical for companies like Google to take that moral leadership in this space, since there are limitations for affected people to pursue system-wide change through tools like class action lawsuits. And I recognize that this is not exclusive to Google and that it extends to many, many other employers. But since you're here before the committee today, which has jurisdiction over this issue, I want to ask you if you will voluntarily commit to expanding the policy of ending forced arbitration for any violation of a person's rights, not just around sexual harassment, but really for all of your employers and your contractors.
Congresswoman, thanks for the question. It's an important area. One thing, if I could clarify, today our arbitration agreements don't require any confidentiality provisions. That's how we have done it. But as you mentioned, for sexual harassment, we agreed that it should be up to the employees, and we gave them a choice. We are definitely looking into this further. It's an area where I've gotten feedback personally from our employees, so we are definitely reviewing what we could do, and I'm looking forward to consulting and happy to think about more changes here.
Well, we'd love to work with you on that. I think that this really, for people who are listening to this hearing that may not understand this, basically when you sign a contract, as we saw with sexual harassment, some employees don't even know what they're signing away, but they're signing away their ability to actually pursue claims in the justice system by going to forced arbitration. And so I think that this is very, very important. I think your point about confidentiality is important, but that's not the issue here. That is about transparency, but it's not about the basic right of somebody to seek access to due process and to justice in the courts. So what stage are you at in advancing the issue of ending forced arbitration, both on the sexual harassment side, but also in terms of the process for looking at it more broadly? How do we have a timeline? How do we engage with you to make sure that you endorse our legislation as we move forward in the next Congress?
We've already enacted the changes for forced arbitration, for giving arbitration as an option for employees for sexual harassment. We are definitely reviewing what more we could do in this area. I'm definitely happy to have my office follow up as they're thinking about it to get your thoughts on it, and we are definitely committed to looking into this more and making changes.
Thank you. The other issue I wanted to just raise in my last minute is moderating hate speech, and this has come up in a number of different ways, and we appreciate the work that you have done, particularly with YouTube. I know we had Alex Jones in the room earlier, but I think promoting conspiracy theories that are patently false and result in real harm is a problem. Do you agree with the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights assessment that social media played a role, for example, in perpetuating genocide against the Rohingya? And what is Google's responsibility to moderate hate speech on your platforms?
We feel a tremendous sense of responsibility to moderate hate speech. We've defined hate speech clearly as inciting violence or hatred towards groups of people. It's absolutely something which I think we need to take a very strict line on, and we've stated our policies clearly, and we are working hard to make our enforcement better, and we have gotten a lot better, but it's not enough, and so we are committed to doing more here.
Well, we really look forward to working with you on that, and before I yield back, Mr. Chairman, let me just take a point of personal privilege to say I was born in the same state as you in India, and I'm excited to see you leading a company and continuing to show that immigrants to this country contribute great value in spite of some of the rhetoric we hear. Thank you, Mr. Pichai. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Now, Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pichai, thank you for being here. I appreciated the reference to Pittsburgh in your opening testimony. Great to have you in a part of our community there. Your company really should be held out as a success story of America's free enterprise system. Google has very powerful products and services. There is a saying that goes with great power comes great responsibility. I think you realize that. I want to talk a little bit about these allegations of bias that have been out there. I've seen the media reports about a few Google engineers lamenting the 2016 election results. Then they discussed potentially manipulating search results that would favor some political viewpoints in the future. On a hypothetical level, those Google engineers believe that they had the power to influence an election. Do you think Google's products and services are powerful enough that they can sway public opinion to tilt an election if the company wanted to? Are your products that powerful?
Congressman, today we see users get information from a wide variety of sources, and while Google is a big player in search, search is just one of the ways in which people get information. They get it from social networking sites.
Do you think that your products are that powerful?
That's not the way I think about it when we are building the products. We constantly worry about the areas where we are not doing well, and we're looking to do better. We definitely see a lot of innovation, not just from within the U.S., but globally around the world. And we do realize we are a large company, and with that comes scrutiny, and we think it's important to engage on that.
You've testified about Google and its algorithms working on in a nonpartisan way, and that you're confident that Google does not approach work with any political bias. Zoe Lofgren highlighted the vote in Santa Clara County. Does Google do anything to ensure ideological diversity among its employees and decision makers?
Congressman, I've communicated clearly to the company that we need to welcome viewpoints from across all sides. As a company, you're right, we are definitely based in Northern California, and clearly, there is a leaning there. But last year was the first year we grew faster outside of California than within California. We also have employees globally. And I do see a wide variety of opinions expressed.
When Mr. Johnson asked a question about the Trusted Flagger program, you said, for us to review. Who's the us? Who's doing that review?
We review things both with a combination of our automated systems as well as manual reviewers. These are people who are part of...
And how many people is that? How many? Is it a committee? Is it...
we've committed to scale up our manual reviewers to over 10,000 people, and we are well underway to do that. And so this is thousands of people working 24/7 globally across, looking at content based on our policies.
Google has described its ethic with these pithy, great statements: don't be evil, do the right thing. I'd like to discuss these ideals in relation to reports at Google that we've been talking about with China. The strict authoritarianism the Chinese government rules its people has caused concern around the globe for generations. I vividly recall the early days of June 1989 in Tiananmen Square. Now I read recent reports about crackdowns on Muslims, on Christians, on Falun Gong. Mass incarcerations and human rights abuses against people of faith in China should be a major concern for everyone around the world, including your company. Did Google design a prototype for a search engine that could be used in China to censor content?
Congressman, we have undertaken an internal effort.
Did you create a prototype? There was a report in The Intercept that says a prototype for the censored search engine was designed.
We have developed and explored what search could look like if it were to be launched in a country like China, and that's what we explored. And
how many months was that project ongoing?
We've had the project underway for a while, and there have been other projects which we've undertaken for a while, and we've never launched them too. So we are constantly exploring.
How many people were working on it?
The estimates, the number of engineers on the project have varied over time. At one point, we have had over 100 people working on it, it's my understanding.
I just want to echo what my colleague, Ms. Jayapal, had said. Yeah, I'm glad you're here at the committee, but I'm glad you're here in our country. You are the success story, and I can just think of you sitting as a teenager in India thinking that this was probably never even on your radar. But you came to this country because this country had that promise out there. And I want to thank you for being here today and encourage you to continue collaborating with this committee. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Demings.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Pichai. I'm here. Thank you so much for being here and enduring all that we have heard and seen today. As you know, Google certainly has significant influence over the dissemination of information to the American people. You have the ability to mold and shape how we think, the decisions we make, what we buy. But let me just remind you and others that America, with all of its greatness, has enough problems. And we have to make sure that the gift of Google is used, the service that you provide is a responsible one. In your own statement, you said that the American people have the ability to use technology to improve their lives. So that tells me Google helps to solve problems, not create problems. My concern specifically centers around the protection of the consumers, because Google certainly would not be anything without the consumer. So the protection of the data, their information, the level of service that you provide. And I know we've talked a lot today about data collection and how it's used, and if the settings are in place, then it's not collected. So let me just understand, really starting with the chairman's questions, which I thought was a good opening for us. If a consumer tells you not to collect their data, then you do not collect the data. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. And how does Google allow advertisers to target ads based on sensitive factors like race, ethnicity, religious affiliation?
Currently, we don't have those, the ones you mentioned as factors in our advertising product.
Okay, and what is your policy regarding predatory advertisements?
You know, we have strict policies against, and, you know, we respond to concerns there. We have undertaken significant changes to the extent we find predatory practices on our platform. So it's an area we are committed to doing better.
And since we do represent everybody, poor communities as well as affluent communities, how do you make sure that the information that is received in at-risk communities protects the consumer, if you will? How are they treated the same in terms of affluent versus poor communities? How do you make sure that they are?
We do engage with community organizations. We do, you know, our teams do wide outreach, and to the extent there are specific concerns, which, you know, there is an abuse of our product or platform which affects, you know, communities disparately, we do follow up and engage and take action.
And how do you do that again, please?
So, for example, you know, if there's a specific category of a product where, you know, we get clear feedback, the way we have implemented the product has a disparate effect on some minority communities, we do engage and we understand and, you know, make changes in our products or policies.
So you get feedback. So do you initiate or do any checking, or does that information have to come back to you, or are you proactive in terms of looking for those type of vulnerabilities?
We do both, and you know, but I do think there's more we can do in being proactive, and it's something I'm happy to follow up and understand better. But you know, it's an area we are committed to doing well.
You talked quite a bit about working more with law enforcement. I believe you've said that maybe 4 or 5 times. I'd like to hear more about some of the things that you do with law enforcement to protect the consumers as well, and protect our electoral process and other things that we should care about.
We do this across a wide variety of areas. So, for example, when there were concerns expressed about election interference, it's an area where we look to law enforcement for guidance. Areas like child safety is an area where we actively collaborate with law enforcement agencies. So, fraud, malware, And depending on the area, we engage and we support them through efforts they are trying to do. The opioid crisis is a good example of an area where we are doing a lot of work with law enforcement.
What do you think is the main area where Google could improve to better help the consumer?
I always
better
think,
protect the consumer.
I always think, privacy is an area where we think is sacrosanct, and we have done a lot for users over the years, but it's an area where expectations are constantly evolving, and we are, as a company, needing to evolve and adapt to it. And so it's an area we are committed to doing better, but it's an area I want to acknowledge that there's more to do, and that it's never done, and something we are committed to doing better.
Again, thank you, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomert, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Pache, appreciate your being here. And I think most all of us agree on both sides. We applaud great work. For example, Steven Spielberg, despite politics, he's provided my family a lot of enjoyment and entertainment. You and your colleagues at Google have created an extraordinary vehicle for searching out things. It's fantastic. And as Mr. Liu, my friend across the aisle, was pointing out, you've got government that's not supposed to interfere in people's civil rights, and then you've got a company, a corporation like Google. My problem is when the government gives its immunity from lawsuits over to a private corporation that's the head of that corporation doesn't even realize that there is political bias run amok in his company. And that's the problem. I don't want to see you overregulated. I don't want to see you regulated. I want to see others come up with brilliant ways, as you, Mr. Brim, and others did, to create something that makes life easier. But a good example, you have a trusted flagger, you'd indicated, called the Southern Poverty Law Center. The Southern Poverty Law Center really has stirred up more hate than about any other group I know. They stirred up one guy to the point that he went to the Family Research Council, and I know those people, and they're Christians. And they believe, and I believe, that Christianity is really more based on love than about any other religion in history. God so loved the world, he sent his son so loved the world, he gave his life. And yet they stirred up hate against the Family Research Center, and a guy goes in shooting. You have, let's see, June 18th of this year, Southern Poverty Law Center announced it had reached a settlement with Najib Nawaz and his organization, Killiam, for falsely labeling them as anti-Muslim hate group. They were wrong. Now, you consider them a trusted flagger, yet they keep creating problems for people that are not haters. And in fact, they had to pay out $3.375 million. My problem is when you put your moniker on them, a trusted flagger, why aren't you paying $3.375 to Mr. Majid Nawaz? That's my problem. You trust people that have stirred up a lot of hate. And another good example, and you're so surrounded by liberality that hates conservatism, hates people that really love our Constitution and the freedoms it's afforded people like you, that you don't even recognize it. It's like a blind man not even knowing what light looks like because you're surrounded by darkness. But if you look, let's see, a good example, after President Trump won, your co-founder, Mr. Brin, said, quote, most people here are pretty upset and pretty sad. Now, a lot of us have seen the video. We saw how upset the top people at Google were. And for you to come in here and say there is no political bias in Google tells us you either are being dishonest, I don't want to think that, or you don't have a clue how politically biased Google is. Now, another example is Wikipedia. We do a search, and what comes up as right there is the knowledge panel on the right, and we hopefully will have a screenshot of that. We get Wikipedia. My chief of staff went on, she told me, every night for 2 weeks and put proper, honest information in with proper annotations, and Wikipedia's liberal editors around the world would knock it out every day and instead put up a bunch of garbage like Mark Levin has now been facing. Yet to you, they get a trusted spot. And when Wikipedia slanders or libels someone and you're the one that has trusted them above any other entity, you ought to be liable. You ought to be liable when the SPLC is liable. You ought to be liable when Wikipedia demeans and uses their political bias. And I hope and encourage you to look around and notice you run off conservatives, you embrace liberals, and it's time Google was actually not immune so that people can hold you accountable and get a little better objectivity. I see my time's run out. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your testimony here today, and a number of these questions flow to me, even though I may be repeating some of this, but I'm still not clear on how many staff and who it is that establishes the parameters by which the algorithms are written. Can you tell me about how many staff that is and how that works?
Congressman, today it's our search team, which works on the core of our search teams, and it's well over 1,000 people. I'm happy to elaborate more, but it's thousands of people.
That's close enough conceptually. And when you hire them, are there people coming in from the outside? Or are they brought up from internally? What's the typical path to this roughly 1,000-person search team?
It's a combination of both, but senior-most engineers on our search team typically tend to have been in the company for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. And so most of the time you will know them from having worked with them. Do you then go into their social media to try to determine what they might be doing on social media?
Normally we don't. As a company, we have allowed people to express themselves, but we make it clear that how we build our products is done with great care and thought, focused on giving users the information they are looking for.
But this team of roughly 1,000, they're the people that write the parameters by which those who write the algorithms write the algorithms.
That's roughly correct, yeah.
Uh-huh. And so there isn't really any look at what their private lives are, even though their public social media is not examined by the company. And does anyone outside of Google know who these 1,000 people are?
We don't examine their personal activities, and there are some senior people do participate in conferences and meetings outside, and they're known to the outside community.
And we're watching people whose social media has knocked them out of some pretty high positions in life. Almost every week there's one or more whose social media, this week, a couple of them that I can think of just in the last 24 or 48 hours. But I'm going to make this point, and I believe I've made it with a number of the internet companies that have been sitting here at this table in the past. What we're at with situation here is that there's a very strong conviction on this side of the aisle that the algorithms are written with a bias against conservatives. The people on the other side don't agree with that because, of course, it benefits them. But what we don't know are who are these 1,000 people, and we don't know what their social media looks like, but we do know that the people that come from that county are about 80% supporters of Hillary Clinton, if I listened to the gentlelady from California correctly. And so that would be a built-in bias if I know people from California and know their politics from California, and I think I do. So we've got, at least theoretically, a built-in bias that's here. It's not being examined and not examining the social media. How would you expect that you could get to an objective result, which you said that, we build our products in a neutral way, but that doesn't mean that your product comes out neutral. So how would you expect to get to an unbiased result with a built-in formula that I've described that I don't think you object to or disagree with?
Congressman, it's an important question, but the way we rank our results is essentially based on user feedback, and that's what drives the iterative loop in our, in what we put in. So
I do understand how it's prioritized that way, and I watch what's going on. But I made this point that if we don't know who the 1,000 are, and we can't look at their social media, and we can't see the algorithms to understand the results of the work they're doing behind closed doors, and yet the public believes that it's an open forum where there's a balanced exchange of open access for information. And of course, it's not. And so I have said we either need to know who they are and look at their social media, and if that doesn't solve this problem, next step then is publish the algorithms. If that doesn't happen, then the next step on the line is Section 230. The amendments to Section 230. And the step on the line beyond that is a Teddy Roosevelt step. Now, I'm looking with Mr. Gohmert. I don't want to regulate anything, but neither do I want to see a society that's so polarized and so divided and so loaded that the will of the American people can't be expressed in the ballot box. That looks like either where we are or the direction we're going. And I would just finish it with this. I have a 7-year-old granddaughter who picked up her phone before the election, and she's playing a little game, kind of game a kid would play, and up on there pops a picture of her grandfather. And I'm not going to say into the record what kind of language was used around that picture of her grandfather, but I'd ask you, how does that show up on a 7-year-old's iPhone who's playing a kid's game?
Congressman, iPhone is made by a different company, and so,
It might have been an Android. It was a hand-me-down of some kind. I'd ask.
I'm happy to follow up and understand the specifics. There may be an application which was being used, which had a notification, but I'm happy to understand it better and clarify it for you.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony, and yield back the balance of my time. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman.
What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
To place 3 questions on the record, Mr. Chairman.
We've already indicated we'll take all questions submitted in writing and ask him to answer them.
And I'd appreciate it if I can share these 3.
All right. Gentlewoman, without objection,
I thank you for your
recognized.
courtesies. I thank you for the courtesy of the gentlelady from Alabama. I think it's her time next. There have been several points made, and obviously algorithm has been mentioned over and over again. 3 questions. One, the explaining how algorithm may play into someone's impression that conservative is over liberal. I think you're very clear on that it's not the case. In addition, your clarification on China and engaging in any activities to censor those individuals. And number 3, the algorithms, again, about your products may be a proprietary, may be a priority over others, and any explanation as to how that is, in fact, if you represent it to be not true, or how that might be perceived that happens. Your products, Google products over others, and how algorithms may play a part into that.
And the gentlewoman will submit those in writing to us so we can submit them
Thank
to
you.
Mr.
And I thank the gentleman, and I thank you for yielding. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Rutherford, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pichai, thank you very much for your testimony today. I want to go back to the privacy policy and talk about some of those issues, because I think that's very important for the American public. You mentioned the transparency in your policy, but when, I know your policy is 20 pages long, changes multiple times a year. I have to ask a couple questions about the policy because I, quite frankly, don't understand all of it. And that is the policy states that Google's data collection applies when, quote, you use Google service. And so most consumers would think that means Google search or Google Maps. My question is, does the policy apply when a consumer contacts a double-click cookie? Are they then under that policy or not?
Today, our product there is called Google Ad Manager, and in general, when users interact with our services, we need their consent, and by law, we need to apply our privacy policy so that we can offer them the full protections we can and fulfill our obligations. And so as part of that, I think if you're interacting with our ad services, we do get your consent for your privacy policy.
So that's written in the policy, and they have, okay. And then secondly, if a consumer does not have a Google account, but they land on a web page that has Google adware again, is that consumer using a Google service under the privacy policy?
My understanding would be yes, if they are interacting, if they may be both subject to the privacy policy of the publisher or the application they are using, as well as the ad platforms that work on that product.
Okay, and then third and finally, your privacy policy says you collect voice and audio information when you use audio features. However, does this mean Google Assistant is recording our voices in conversations? How about when just using Google Voice? Is that actually being recorded?
Today, if you invoke Google Voice by either using the microphone or you say, OK, Google, and issue a command, we treat it like a search query and record that activity. But we have a separate setting in which, as a user, you can choose whether you want these stored or not. And so we give users the choice and the option.
See, when it gets to transparency, I think when you realize you have these active, where I'm clicking and giving that information and agreeing to it, I think people understand that information is going out and they're giving that permission. But it's these passive collection points, like Android and Chrome, where they're picking up that information and the user, I'm not sure the user actually knows that. And so, one of my questions is we're agreeing to a privacy policy, but we don't really know what information we're giving up because there are other groups that you are contracting with, Android and Chrome, who are collecting passive information. How do you address that, and how do you make that transparent for the consumer?
Congressman, we realize privacy policy alone is not enough. This is why we prompt and give privacy checkups.
Right. So let me stop you there and ask you then, because is it possible for Google to send me a printout of all the information that they have collected on me within the last month, and where I've been, where I've clicked, is all that information? You have all that information. It can be provided to me, right?
We do make it available to you very easily. We are concerned about the security of the data, so we don't casually get it out. But
right. So I would ask if because I'm running out of time, but instead of me as a consumer or anyone as a consumer giving you the privacy right up front, why don't you be more honest with me? Tell me exactly what information has been collected, what information you want to share, and then allow me to decide how much of that information I would like to share as a consumer.
Congressman, I agree with that sentiment. In fact, what we precisely do is actually we are very transparent, and we make it very easy. You go to your account settings, we clearly tell the categories, and you can click and see the information we have. You can turn it on or off. But we want to do better, and
but there are areas where information is being collected. Even if I have the particular sites turned off, there's still information being collected through some of these other passive systems that you've contracted with. Correct?
We are pretty explicit about data which we collect, and we give protections for you to turn them on or off. And even when you use a product like Chrome or Gmail, or Google Home, we are very clear about the data we collect, and we reflect it back to the user, the data we have on them, and we try to be transparent.
I can just say, and my time's out, but I would tell you this: I would much rather be giving permission after I know what information I'm giving up. So thank you very much again, and I appreciate your time. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, thanks, gentleman. Recognizes the gentlewoman from Alabama, Ms. Roby, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I'm just going to build upon what my colleague was just talking about and use a specific example. In June of 2016, Google changed its privacy policy to allow for combining the double-click cookie information with, quote, personal identifiable information. Before this change, the cookies that track people across the web were not melded with other consumer information Google got from searches or Android phone use. And it's my understanding that when Google purchased DoubleClick, representations were made that Google would keep the data separate. The point here is you've heard from many people concerns today about the consumer and what the consumer knows. And I understand there's a personal responsibility as a consumer to do my part to try to understand this. But it's also very complicated stuff. And so I want to point to something positive that Google is doing. In March, you had the Online Safety Roadshow that came through Alabama's 2nd Congressional District to a middle school, Girard Middle School in Dothan. You're being a corporate citizen by trying to teach our young people how to be smart and safe on the internet. And as a mom of a 13-year-old girl, I appreciate that very much. I think that is truly, truly a good example of what it means to be a corporate citizen, that these young people can have the world in their hands, and recognizing that all the positive things that can come from it, there's some dangers as well. I would just say, I think what we would all benefit from is understanding as a corporate citizen, what are you doing to educate the consumer about the privacy policy? You've heard many of my colleagues point to the fact that you have this 20-page privacy policy, but it changes multiple times during the year, or there's representations that are made in 2016 about DoubleClick that change. And so most of us don't have a way to understand this in a way to know that the data that's being collected on us, exactly how it's being used. So I applaud you for the work that you're doing to educate our young people, but I would just ask if you could provide us, you said you used the words evolve and adapt when it comes to the policy, but what are you doing specifically to help educate your consumers on how they can be aware of when they click I accept on the privacy policy that they have a better understanding of how their data is going to be used?
Congresswoman, it's a good question. And for example, we are sending email reminders for certain types of data that's being collected and asking you to go review your settings. And that's an example of the kind of evolution we are doing and we are implementing. We are looking at combining settings where we can so that it's easier for users. So we want to minimize the number of controls, but we want to match it with users have complex expectations too. For example, they want some of their devices to be private, but they are okay with some of their other devices being able to be used where location is aware, et cetera. So we are trying to match users' expectations. Users do tell us when they search for weather or restaurants, they want restaurants near their location and not somewhere else. And as you can imagine, if someone from Alabama is searching, they want information relevant to them. So that's what we are trying to meet. But I agree with you that we need to simplify this even more. And there's more work to do. And it's a constant effort we are undertaking. As I look into 2019, we'll be doing more changes to make things work better. And I'll take this feedback to account.
Well, and just one example my legislative assistant was showing me in the privacy policy where it's redlined to show what the change was. But it's not pointed out to that I'm aware of, it's not pointed out to the consumer when the policy is updated for whatever reason, what the exact change is. You have to go search for it and find it yourself. And so if I've got that correct, you can correct me if I'm wrong, But my understanding is you would have to scroll through the entire privacy policy to see where the changes were made. Is that correct?
I'm happy to follow up on that. I do think there are times we've pointed out to the updates in a blog post or something, and we make it clear what the changes are. But happy to follow up and get the specifics.
I just think the more you could streamline to the consumer how their personal information will be used, is being used, without the consumer having, I mean, again, there's personal responsibility there as well. But I just think you're doing some good things in terms of educating folks about, particularly with the Online Safety Roadshow. I think that you could take some of the work you're doing there and hearing our concerns here today, look for ways that you could better educate the consumer moving forward. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pichai, a couple of quick follow-ups here. I don't think anybody asked who makes the judgment calls regarding content moderation at Google.
Chairman, it depends on the area. So, for example, if it's YouTube, we have, very clear teams which are responsible for YouTube content policies. And
Are they identified? Is it possible for a customer to write to them and say, hey, here's a concern I have?
We give clear channels for content creators to, to raise concerns back, and we have clear avenues. And we also have had people who are responsible for these platforms, including content moderation, appear here, and I think they've consulted widely here too.
I have a question about preloaded apps. Do you have agreements with the companies that, I mean, Amazon might have an app that they put on your platform. Do you have a data sharing agreement with them? Do they get the information and you get the information that's generated by their app as well? How does that work?
We don't have any special agreements with respect to user data as part of preloading any application.
So if somebody puts an app on your platform, they do it with your permission, is that correct?
Not necessarily. So for example, a device manufacturer can preload applications on Android, and it's up to them and the app developer to do so.
All right. If they operate on your operating system, do you get the information as well as the app owner?
Of information about what's happening within that application?
Right.
Unless there may be specific cases where the user has given us diagnostic information. So the answer would depend on the context, but in general, no. I mean, the relationship is between the user and the app developer.
If you get an app that gathers information on a specific thing, that's not also coming to Google as well as to the developer of the app?
In a general sense, no.
All right, and then finally, and this you can write to us a written answer because it's a very lengthy answer, I believe. But I'm interested in knowing, I know you've had a lot of difficulties in Europe of late, and I'm interested in knowing how your policy in Europe differs from your policy in the United States.
I'm happy to have it. I think it's a pretty extensive topic. I'm happy to have a follow-up on that area back to your office.
Okay, yes, we would appreciate that. We'll give you some written questions that other members have provided. We'll have some more of our own, and we would ask that you respond to those promptly.
We definitely will.
Thank you. Well, you've gone for about 3.5 hours, and it's about what we predicted, isn't it, yesterday when we talked? So we thank you very much for your participation today. This concludes today's hearing, and without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit written questions for the witness or additional materials for the record. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you for being here. I'll never forget.